Fentanyl. It could be hiding anywhere, including in your house, including in your medicine cabinet, or maybe at a friend's house when you're hanging out, playing games, and get offered a pill. Don't take chances. If a drug didn't come from a pharmacy directly to you, you can find fentanyl using a simple strip you can pick up at your local pharmacy. Don't take it until you test it, because fentanyl can be hiding anywhere. Brought to you by the Georgia Department of Behavioral Health and Mental Disabilities.
This message comes from Greenlight. Ready to start talking to your kids about financial literacy? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app that teaches kids and teens how to earn, save, spend wisely, and invest with your guardrails in place. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Join millions of parents and kids building healthy financial habits together on Greenlight. Get started risk-free at greenlight.com/audio.
Over the past 75 years, more than 10,000 chemicals have entered our food supply, but the EU allows just 300 additives. At Thrive Market, we prioritize quality, banning over 1,000 ingredients found in conventional grocery stores. Our Healthy Swap scanner helps you find better versions of your pantry essentials without the junk, dyes, or fillers, and everything is delivered right to your doorstep. So shop at a grocery store that actually cares about your health at thrivemarket.com/get started for 30% off your first order and a free $60 gift.
It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. We got a great guest. We've had him on before, Len Colodny. Very popular guest, one of the most popular shows we've had. We had him on to talk about his book, Silent Coup. As you can go back and check that out in the archives and find that. And he's also written another book called The 40 Years' War, The Rise and Fall of the Neocons from Nixon to Obama. And just recently, he's got this great, as a private investigator, when you're interviewing people, you want to find out the story about somebody, right? And you meet someone and they got all the dirt. You meet someone, they got all the dirt. When I met Len Colodny, he's got all the information that you want to know about Bob Woodward. He's the guy to talk to. He's been kind of tussling with him for about 30, 40 years now. And I think Len's coming out on top, because if you see Bob Woodward at this press club recently, it didn't look like he was holding up too good. And I look at Len on this camera here, he looks pretty good. So Len, are you there?
I'm here. I'm here just for no other purpose than to get Bob Woodward. I tell you, he is a piece of work, and he'll go down in history as one of the greatest fake news journalists ever. And with his fake friend that he met in a garage with a raincoat on or something. So that's the history that gives you the birth of fake news.
I got to tell you, whenever I see a Woodward come on TV, the first thing that comes to mind is Len Colodny, Silent Coup. But Len, tell us about yourself. Who is Len Colodny?
Well, I started out in the liquor business after I didn't get a degree in college. And I worked with my father for 20 years and took a real interest in the Kennedy assassination. Was fascinated by it. And became what was called an expert in those days, along with Mark Lane and Harold Weisberg. We did television shows, and we did one in Washington on June 6, 1968. God, that's a long time ago. And we had a 4-hour talk show. Jack Anderson, you might remember from his days as a Pulitzer Prize winning columnist, was there. And it was the night that Bobby Kennedy was shot and killed. And here we are talking about the Kennedy assassination and all the theories and what's wrong with the Warren report. And I did that for a number of years. And then it sort of, I went into politics for 5 years. And I was appointed chairman of the Law Enforcement Practices Panel in Prince George's County, Maryland. And we had a police department of about 850 officers, and they were under threat from the Justice Department in those days. And I was given the job of chairman. So I oversaw these 850 police officers. And it was quite a job. And when I left, strangely enough, both sides still liked me. The community liked me and the police liked me. So it made me kind of an investigator. I taught at the police academy. And then the Nixon thing came along only because of my encounter with Bob Woodward in 1980. He actually did a fake news story on me, and we have it on our website under disclosure. What he did was he would quote me, but he was quoting from someplace else. He would say, well, it came from a deposition, but it didn't. It came from a tape. And he was told he couldn't use the tape. Then he called me up that next morning and said, we got to say there's a tape, Len. And I said, no, we don't. And we went, you can hear us go back and forth for 20 minutes. And that started my curiosity. Wait a minute. If he does this kind of stuff now, what did he do in Watergate? And then Secret Agenda came out by Jim Hogan in 1984. And there was this little tidbit that Woodward worked in the White House. Nobody knows to this day that Woodward was in the Nixon government, in the White House, and actually operating in the secret government. What he would do is he would man a secret back channel in the Pentagon, and he would take the messages from the back channel and deliver them to Alexander Haig. So what we're told to believe in Watergate is that this young reporter goes out and does all these things and meets somebody in a garage. And when all he had to do was dial the White House and say, hello, Al, it's Bob. I'm working at the Post now. And of course, he didn't do that. Oh, yes, he did. And so that was the road that led to Silent Coup. And I'm very proud of that book. It's a roadmap to what happened. History would have been totally different if that hadn't happened. And the forces that did Nixon in are the same forces that are aiming at Trump now. The intelligence community and the military are right out front. This isn't an endorsement of Trump. It's just to say it's there. We're watching the same forces at work. And recently I did a show, which I rarely do because I'm a liberal Democrat, a JFK Democrat, but I did do a show with Roger Stone over at InfoWars. And what I was saying to those people is, look, don't let what happened to Nixon happen to Trump. Not because I like Trump, but we have a constitution that says the president of the United States does something wrong. You put it before the House Judiciary Committee, you impeach him, then you try him in the Senate. That never happened to Nixon. So we ended up with an unelected president in Ford and an unelected vice president in Rockefeller. The Constitution wasn't set up to do that. We don't politically just push people out of office. But thanks to the great Bob Woodward and his friends, we did push a president out of office. And I warned my friends over there that they should, support their president, but understand if he did something wrong, the process is X, as I explained it to them. So it was an interesting show with Roger and myself.
Yeah, well, let me ask you this. What do you think when you see these guys like Paul Manafort and Roger Stone and even Pat Buchanan with the America First, that the Pat Buchanan style speech? What comes to your mind when you see these characters resurrecting and getting over there?
So Roger is a friend.
Okay.
And we couldn't be more different politically. He's sort of like a legend. And I've always wished the Democrats had somebody that good. And we just don't seem to have the guy to go and do the knockout punch like he would do. So we became friendly, and he asked to do it. And we did it. And I think that show was watched that night by the president. I didn't get that from the president, but I did hear. And guess what? It was the night that he determined that Barack Obama had wiretapped him.
Oh, get out of here.
You never know.
Are you responsible for that?
I'm not saying anything. I'm taking the fifth.
Oh man, that would be great.
I hear you watched it. So, and he's a fan of Silent Coup.
Oh, really?
Well, he should be. I think every American should be a fan of Silent Coup. If they ever saw the movie All the President's Men, they owe it to themselves to see what really happened and not a fairy tale. I don't know what happened that night, but something happened. It was kind of funny. I did the show. We did it for about 10 minutes, and it was really nothing I said. You know, I wasn't saying there was this great conspiracy or whatever. I wasn't saying that stuff. And it ends, and the next day I'm listening to the news, and the president is sending these tweets out that say things like Watergate Nixon, and I'm thinking, that's exactly what we were talking about that afternoon. So then somebody calls me and says, Len, you ought to read Breitbart. And I said, Breitbart? You know it. What am I going? No, he said, you got to go there. So I go there. This is Monday after the Friday show. And the headline on a Mark Levin piece was Obama's silent coup. I'm thinking, okay, I did the show. Then he tweets Nixon, and there's an Obama silent coup all within 3 days. And yeah, it kind of intrigued me.
Oh man, that is fascinating.
So, you know, I'm going with my friends, and they're saying, you know, so I said to one friend, you know, you got people in the White House. Ask if they saw me on InfoWars. And the answer came back, we can't rule it out. Okay. I didn't know that I could just, you know, shake the country with going on InfoWars. It's just rather amazing. And then to have Mark Levin it was kind of made me think that maybe Roger and the Breitbart guy all got together, and who knows?
Well, let me ask you this.
Find out if I'm called before a committee investigating this, you'll know what happened.
Yeah, maybe they'll have Woodward there too. You could find it out. Hey, let me ask you this.
I would demand he cover it.
Let me ask you this now. How far in advance did they book you to do that show? Maybe the whole thing was a plan. What?
I'm taking the fifth on that too.
Oh man.
Look, I've been in politics a long time. You know, I'm not a historian. I'm a investigator, an analyst, a political analyst. Do you think that maybe that passed through my mind after I saw all this? I haven't seen the word silent coup used in 25 years, except on my book. And the only place I was talking about silent coup was that Friday, the same Friday that the Breitbart article appeared 2 hours after I left the air. So, and guess what that was about?
Yeah.
It was about Obama wiretapping Trump. That's what the Obama silent coup was.
Yeah.
He was secretly. The next day he's tweeting, my God.
Right now, Levin, how long do you think Levin was working on that little theory, though? Did it coincide with the amount of time we were being?
I don't know, but it, you know, you're reading Nixon and Watergate, and then in the same series of tweets, you're reading, you know, and I was thinking about it, and what was really interesting is the media loved it because he's lying. He can't produce any evidence that there was this, you know, thing where Obama would survey Trump Tower and all that. And so the media loved it. They just jumped all over him and jumped all over him. And, you know, asking him for evidence and then determining when he doesn't give it to you that he lied. if you look at those tweets carefully, you'll see the words, and I may be, but it's very close in the tweets. I just learned now.
Right.
Those words. And then he went on to talk about the rest of the tweets. And I'm thinking, why doesn't a journalist ask him what he just learned now? At 6:30 in the morning, they got him to do that. Not yet have one journalist asked him, oh, what did you learn now? Just a few words. Now we're going to have a whole investigation. It's just amazing. It isn't. So I'm looking at my fellow journalists and saying, what are you doing, folks? All you have to do is ask that question. Don't ask him for the evidence. Just ask him what he learned that he tweeted about at 6:30 in the morning.
Yeah, because he could
too easy.
Yeah, right. Hey, I'm getting a question from the chat room real quick. What do you know about the Quorum Club and Roger Stone?
I don't.
You don't know anything?
You know how I met Roger?
Okay.
Roger was writing his Nixon book, Nixon Secrets. And I knew about Roger, but I'd never met Roger.
Okay. And
he called me up and he said, look, I really like to have you help me with the book. And I said, well, I'm not. In fact, I had just gotten the shingles, and anybody that hasn't gotten a shingle shot should get a shingle shot if they're a male over or a woman over 50 or 60.
Okay.
And I was recovering from that. I said, I can't do it. He wanted to come over and spend a few days. But we got to talking, and he was always a big fan of Silent Coup. But he had written his book where John Dean was the ultimate villain. And he said, I said, oh, by the way, have you read my other book, 40 Years War? And he said, no, did you write another book? And to tell you how widespread I had gotten at that point.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah, it's a very important book. So he read it, and he literally took that part, the third part of his book about Dean, and replaced it with Haig, and told the Haig story that's in 40 Years War. And very grateful. And he called me after that and he said, I don't want you to take this as disrespect for Silent Coup, but you know what? 40 Years War is a much more important book. I took that as a compliment.
So I guess
that's how we met.
Yeah, fascinating.
And, he insisted that Silent Coup be republished. And as you know, we did. We republished both this year with trying.
Fentanyl. It could be hiding anywhere, including in your house, including in your medicine cabinet, or maybe at a friend's house when you're hanging out, playing games, and get offered a pill. Don't take chances. If a drug didn't come from a pharmacy directly to you, you can find fentanyl using a simple strip you can pick up at your local pharmacy. Don't take it until you test it, because fentanyl can be hiding anywhere. Brought to you by the Georgia Department of Behavioral Health and Mental Disabilities.
Hey, with updates. So, readers who've never read Silent Coup, a generation who was wide open to that. And of course, the good news is we're just going online at Texas A&M with my research. So a lot of good things have happened in the last 5 years to Silent Coup. And 40 Years War was a direct descendant of Silent Coup. It's a really important story because it explains how the coup came about. And it came about this way. I was told that Kissinger had a mentor, and Haig had a mentor called Fritz Kramer. And I want to know who Fritz Kramer was. There was a football coach named Fritz Kramer at Michigan, but it turned out it wasn't him. It was a Fritz Kramer in the Pentagon. And he had developed this provocative weakness theory. And the provocative weakness theory is you never negotiate ever. If you do, you go in with a gun pointed at the guy's head. And you build your military so strong that they will never come and attack you. That's the provocative weakness theory. Well, as a result of all that Nixon did secretly, he influenced the forming of the neoconservatives. And they made up of right-wing Republicans and what were then called Scoop Jackson Democrats, who were very good on social issues, but very hawkish on foreign policy. They all came together. And in 1980, when Reagan won, they had now fully integrated. And guess what Reagan's slogan was? Peace through strength. Interpreted the provocative weakness theory, because you could never say that. Nobody would understand it. But if you say peace through strength, everybody understands it. Well, they're in the Republican. You can go out there now. It didn't tell you they're for peace through strength. And that's how this all came about. But it came about in the context that I wrote about in 40 Years' War. So you learn things. And the way I learned things was basically ask the question, how did Al Haig get in this White House? Who let him loose? And that's how it led to Fritz Kramer. And Fritz, who died in 2003, was 95 years old. His son Sven is still in Washington, had been in the National Security Council. And the Bush administration was the classic administration for the provocative weakness theory. That's why they did Iraq. That's why they did what they did. Got us into a 15-year war. And Kramer was invited to the Pentagon just before we launched our great war into Iraq. And I found out that everybody loved this guy. Dick Cheney called him one of the greatest human beings ever. Don Rumsfeld called him, the keeper of the flame. They just loved this guy, and nobody ever heard of him. And they would hold dinners and give him awards and everything. And he's still a very strong force. If you listen to Donald Trump, he's doing just what Kramer would have him do, building the military up so nobody will attack us, or he thinks that will work. But he's following the Kramer provocative weakness theory almost to a T.
Let me ask you a question.
He's not a neoconservative, but when you put Kramer together with the word neoconservative, you got a really bad situation.
About Fritz Kramer, right?
You end up looking for weapons of mass destruction that didn't exist.
Now,
of course, we're real popular in the Middle East. We set the whole place on fire, and now we don't know how to put it out unless we, of course, deal with Mr. Putin. And then we come to, did Putin do what, mess with our elections? Let me ask you, do you think we've ever messed with other countries' elections?
Well, we're doing it right now in Venezuela today.
Oh, my God. That's just mind-boggling.
In front of our eyes.
But we don't tolerate that.
Let me ask you a question about Fritz Kramer, though, before we get too far. Because Mae Brussels, I'm being told from the chat room that Mae Brussels used to talk about Fritz Kramer, and that there was a Nazi that was also named Fritz Kramer, and that she thought they were both the same person.
That's true. When I was doing 40 Years' War, I read a lot of Mae Brussels, and I had to convince myself by evidence that he was not the same man. She attacked. That was like every other time you would hear that.
Yeah.
And she was pointing at him. But here's the strange thing, and this is how it plays itself out. First, he mentored Kissinger. They came out of World War II. They were both in the military, in our military. Fritz was a German expert in those days for our military. In fact, the job he had in the Pentagon for years and years and years was just that, to keep the Pentagon informed on Germany and issues like that. But all along, he was creating this mass of people who believed in this stuff. And what happened was Nixon signs NSDM2, and, you've got Kissinger, mentored by Kramer, now going around the world kissing somebody's behind, so we can get China and so we can get a deal with the Soviet Union. And guess what we'll do? We'll use Vietnam as a bargaining chip. And Kramer meets with the president in 1972. And I've got it on our website. You can hear him. And he's telling the president, you can't leave Vietnam. The whole world will think you weak. The whole world, Mr. President, I mean, he treated him like he was like a school kid, you know, and it was too late because the president had already cut his deals to get out of Vietnam. And to me, it was the worst thing Nixon did. He bled us out of Vietnam. He virtually could have had the same terms in 1969 that he ended up with. But in order to deal with the Chinese and the Soviets, he needed to use it as a bargaining chip. And here's the worst part. More of our people died under Nixon than died under Johnson. He bled us out. You know, Watergate or whatever, it's peanuts next to that. So, you know, I learned a lot doing 40 Years War, but we now have a picture of Fritz on the front cover of the new book, updated book, because this man mystically has this power over people. And I don't know how many speeches Trump's given on foreign policy, but I bet you every one contains the word peace and straight. Nobody knows what it means unless you happen to have read 40 Years War,
Len,
which I hope you'll do.
Let me ask you this, because you keep mentioning your website. What is your website?
Watergate.com.
Watergate.com. That's right, man. That's a gold mine. Watergate.com.
And it's loaded with evidence for both books. You'll get to hear Bob Woodward lie to me that I never briefed anybody. I didn't brief Haig. I don't even know Haig. I didn't meet him until 1973. It's classic. And he's caught in that trap. And then he had another trap where Deep Throat was only a confirming source. In the movie, you know, it's real shadowy. And he never came to us with information. We brought him information, and then he would confirm it. So I pick up a copy of All the President's Men, and I'm saying, look, here's a story by Bob Woodward, November 1973, which says that Deep Throat came to you and said, there are deliberate erasures on the White House tapes. Now, Bob, either he erased them himself or he was there when they were erased. But that's direct information. And Bob says, well, you know, he evolved. I said, when did he evolve? You know, in your book, in the movie? No. In your house where we're having this interview with 3 tape recorders running. So it turns out that Deep Throat wasn't always just the confirming source. He just got so upset at Nixon that he became a direct source. It's crazy. And of course, Mark Felt, who doesn't work in the White House and had been fired months earlier, is the supposed source of the deliberate erasure. That's crazy. Al Haig erased the tapes, told Woodward, put them in the paper. That's how it went down. I remember when we were writing the beginning of Silent Coup, we were trying to sell it to publishers, and I called him the cat's paw. And he got so upset at the word cat's paw. I said, well, you know, you kind of like, you know, Haig told you to do it. You did it. It's sort of, he's the head and you're the... anyway.
Have you heard the story of Robert Merritt? You know, Robert Merritt was the informant there that worked for that police officer that was sitting out in
Schaffler, Carl Schaffler.
Carl Schaffler, yeah. What about the theory that Schaffler is the Deep Throat?
No. There is no Deep Throat.
There's no Deep Throat.
Just made it up. It's to cover Haig, and it doesn't work. We have a wonderful advisory committee to the collection at Texas A&M, and John O'Connor, who was the attorney for Mark Felt, did a great job. He boxed Woodward in. He forced him to say it was Mark Felt. Mark Felt was going to be like, you know, what happened was Woodward comes to visit Mark Felt in 1999 in California, and unfortunately, Mark has dementia. I mean, this isn't a joke. This is a reality. And the family sees Bob Woodward visiting, you know, their father, and they put 2 and 2 together. He must be Deep Throat. So his father now starts writing about being Deep Throat, and he gets John O'Connor to represent him. They never really made a book deal because the tapes they presented of Mark. One day he was deep throat, and the next day he wasn't deep throat. But John did such a great job of positioning him. And Vanity Fair writes a piece that, he's deep throat. And Woodward is being asked to comment on it. And I remember because I was on MSNBC that night, and it got to be 5 o'clock, and we still haven't heard from Woodward. And then lo and behold, about 5:15, yeah, he's deep throat. Okay, Bob. Anybody could be deep throat. But I give John O'Connor a lot of credit. He's the one guy that really boxed Woodward in and forced the issue. And, Bob sold his deep throat notes, to the University of Texas for $5 million.
Wow.
So, as it turns out, they're a tad inaccurate. Like one of the notes that was deep throat turned out to be Don Santarelli. So they waited 2 years and then they changed it to Don Santarelli, who was a Justice Department lawyer. He wasn't deep throat either. So there's some real good investigation. It looks like Bill Sullivan, who was a top FBI guy, was a big source for Woodward. This is the guy that did COINTELPRO for the FBI, and he put a tape recorder under Martin Luther King's bed. That's the guy that's feeding Woodward, at least in March of 1973. So people will believe what they want to believe. I think as the books have built and you understand this role that Woodward played and the role that Haig played, I call it a situational conspiracy. And this is why I do this. Because in reality, if there was a conspiracy, Nixon had to be in it because he made Haig chief of staff. So, wait a minute. Nixon's in his own conspiracy. No, it was situational. Haig comes in. He wants Haig to be his chief of staff. Bob Haldeman has recommended him. And he basically says, look, I'm going to give you the domestic side of the government. You're literally going to be president for the next 15 months, which is what Ray Locker's book is going to be about, the 15-month presidency of Al Haig. He had all the power. And so he's got a president who at night is drinking and taking pills, and he's saying, and disagrees with Haig on foreign policy because Haig is a Kramer guy. Haig was part of a military spy ring that Nixon caught. The problem is he stopped the investigation and never found out that Haig was a key player. So now Haig is given all this power, and the spy ring is still under investigation by the Pentagon. So guess what he does? He convinces Nixon to hire the attorney from the Pentagon, J. Fred Bozart, who's also defending the spy ring. So he's now the attorney for the victim of the spy ring and the spy ring at the same time. And you put that together, you got a team. Haig to Bozart to Woodward, each performing their role. Example, Haig needed to get the word out that there's a taping system, because that's the only way you're going to get Nixon out. Those tapes have to come out. So the Senate Watergate committee brings Alex Butterfield in, and just like that, he gives up the taping system. The question is, how did he get there? Who recommended that Butterfield testify before the Watergate committee? 3 guesses. The first 2 don't count. Bob Woodward didn't do it once; he did it twice. May 17th, he went up of 1970. He went up there and recommended Butterfield. They didn't take him that time. But come July, after Dean testified, Woodward again goes and says, you really got to call this guy. Well, of course Woodward's doing that because Al is telling the cat's paw what to do. So that's just an example. We were all taken for a ride. What a fairy tale.
Well, let me ask a couple of questions, because I've interviewed both Robert Merritt and Doug Caddy separately. They don't get along with each other anymore. And they're both rare interviews. These two guys
is Merritt a lot? I did a series of tape stuff with Merritt. I thought he was a little crazy.
Yeah.
Oh, he spent hours and hours with me, but at the last, he called me, said he was dying. And he sent me pictures that were, no, I can't talk, pornographic.
Oh, really?
Or he'd been surgically, whatever.
Well, that's fascinating.
Doug, I never interviewed, but we are friendly now.
Oh, you are? You're friendly with Doug Caddy. Now, he was friends with Guy Bannister.
I know. You know what? To do my job well, I've been in politics a long time, JFK being the first campaign I actually worked in as a very young man. But to do my job, being an investigator and a political analyst and want to be the best, you got to talk to everybody.
I agree with you, yeah.
And so when I say I'm friendly with Doug, it doesn't mean I'm friendly with his friends. And I talk to everybody. People would say to me about Silent Coup, why did John Mitchell talk to you? Who are you? And then they hear my interview tapes and they said, well, you told them what you knew. And I said, I'm not a prosecutor. It's not my job to come in and accuse the accused. They get accused by you. I'm just in there to try and get them to talk to me. And people who will listen to my interview tapes, they're very conversational. It's sort of like back and forth. I've had people say things they never would have said if I were asking questions. And I believe that's the way to do my job. If I don't know the other side, if I don't know people who are different than I am and have different political beliefs, I'll never have a chance of knowing what's right. And to put into my books.
I got to tell you, you have a quality about you that's very respectful.
Fentanyl. It could be hiding anywhere, including in your house, including in your medicine cabinet, or maybe at a friend's house when you're hanging out, playing games, and get offered a pill. Don't take chances. If a drug didn't come from a pharmacy directly to you, you can find fentanyl using a simple strip you can pick up at your local pharmacy. Don't take it until you test it, because fentanyl can be hiding anywhere. Brought to you by the Georgia Department of Behavioral Health and Mental Disabilities.
It's very respectful and likable. And because I remember when you first came on the show, you went over and over. You were talking about all these people you met and they were inviting you to stay at their house. And I was saying, what's this guy? Everybody he meets invites him over. And you have that kind of charm. Like, I would invite you over to spend a few days. I would love it.
And I'd be happy to come.
Well, yeah, I can't get rid of you.
And you know what?
Yeah.
I'm not there to prosecute you.
Right.
I'm not there to put you in jail. I want to know what the hell happened to this country. What did you do? Tell me your side of the story. And many times their side of the story actually checked out. But once you get that taint of this Watergate thing, because what Haig cleverly did is he used Dean and Watergate to get Nixon. It wasn't Nixon's break-in. He didn't order the break-in, but he did collaborate with Dean on the cover-up. But the other guys went down just almost by accident. So I got to know John Ehrlichman and Bob Haldeman and a number of other people, including Bob Woodward and John Dean. And I talked to them all and gave them the opportunity to say whatever they wanted. Now, of course, Dean was so upset after the tape interview I did with him, or many, I did about 6, where I said to him, I said, John, here's the problem. You told me to read everything. So I read your book and I read your testimony before the Watergate Committee, and John, they don't match, particularly on the issue of, investigating the DNC and what was done. And he says, well, let me tell you what really happened. Oh, what really happened, he said, was his editors wanted to make the book better, more exciting. So they put false stuff in there.
Oh, brother.
So what could he do about it? So I called Alice Mayhew, who was the editor that allegedly did this. And she said, he's a liar. Well, we're shocked and amazed. So Dean came to Tampa and he wanted me prosecuted for taping him. And he went and took over the state's attorney's office because they got the famous John Dean. He came in and they let him subpoena all my tapes. I had to go to court after they finally stopped prosecuting me because there was nothing to prosecute. I had to go to court in what's called a replevin hearing, and the court ruled there all the tapes, I'm the owner. So that issue is settled. And now all those tapes are resting at Texas A&M, which, by the way, is only 60 miles from the University of Texas and that $5 million bunch of junk that Woodward sold them. And I think they're rivals. They think they're football rivals.
Oh, okay.
Whatever. Doesn't matter.
Now, you were telling me off the air that you have a little black book. Now, that little black book is Mo Dean's little black book, or she's in the little black?
Heidi Reichen. Oh. Heidi Reichen worked with John Dean. She's a prostitute, and she also is a top person in the Washington mob. She was, well, I don't want to say, she wasn't the top person, but she was under FBI surveillance at the time she was working with Dean. And this is where Dean got the idea. This is where the CIA merges with the mob. They had put a similar operation at what was called the Columbia Plaza, block away from the Watergate. And similar is, I mean, people would come in there for sex, and they would photograph them or tape them or whatever. That would be the CIA. So she's working with the CIA with John Dean, who's known her for years and a friend of Mo's. So he sets up the same kind of deal with the DNC. And she gets this guy, Phil Bailey, to be her intermediary. Well, of course, Dean has denied all of this. But Phil Stanford wrote a book called White House Call Girl. And if you hadn't had him on,
I've had him on.
What Phil did is he gave me the copies of her book, of her entire black book. And it's really kind of amazing. Very few politicians. John Dean's in there and Maureen Dean is in there. But there's one that's even more fascinating. Sam Dash, the counsel to the Watergate Committee, is in her book with his unlisted phone number. I'm thinking, did Dean trade sex for that piece of junk that he gave? Or what? How does Sam Dash get in this prostitute who's running the DNC operation with his unlisted number? But she was basically into gambling. So guess who's in the book? A bunch of professional football players. You remember Paul Hornung?
No.
Paul Hornung's in the book. Hugh O'Brien's in the book. It's just amazing. She did a real, and so I now have the copies of every name that was in the book, and it will go to Texas A&M University to be part of the thing. And that's thanks to Phil Stanford. He said, Len, you deserve it. And he sent it to me. So I'm just going through it now, and it will be sent to Texas A&M and put into the what's called the Colodney collection. I'm so excited about that, to know that all the work I did for Old Time is going to be online. Everybody can get it. And we'll see who was right, me or Al Haig and Bob Woodward. I think it's me. Well, I always thought it was me.
Now, but you're saying that Dean was running his own blackmail operation?
Well, he and Heidi were essentially doing that. They had the pictures of the girls, and let's just say this is for hypothetical. In those days, Bill Clinton was like lieutenant governor or governor of Arkansas. So when he comes to Washington, and they show him a bunch of pictures. You want to show pictures to Bill Clinton, and then you can pick A or Z or whoever, and then they set the deal up, and you're taking care of that night. That's what was actually going on at the DNC. And it was the desk that had the pictures that the burglar had the key for the desk, Martinez. And now it turns out Martinez was on the CIA payroll that night that he got arrested with the key, tried to swallow the key to the desk. And that's when Carl Schaffler got the key. And Carl Schaffler matched that key to the desk where the pictures were. Carl did a lot of good work, but mostly, and he was very helpful to me, but he was also very helpful to the CIA. They didn't want the story to go too far. They wanted that part out of the story.
How was Schaffler?
I think Merritt thought or said that Schaffler was gay. I believe I'm right on that. And that he was gay.
Merritt's gay, yeah.
Merritt. Now, it was a very strange relationship that he tells. And he sent me a bunch of stuff, and so then people asked me why I would talk to Merritt. He's crazy. You know what? Gordon Liddy's a little crazy. A bunch of these folks are a little nuttier. They wouldn't be where they are. I listen to everybody.
Let me ask you a question about
dots together and pieces of puzzles together, and you never know that they might have a sliver that makes it all work.
No, I hear you, man. Take everybody safe.
I spent a lot of time on the phone with Merritt.
But back to Schaffler. What do you make of him, like, hanging around outside out front? It was his day off, wasn't it?
Of course.
What do you make of that?
This is the part of this story that we don't fully understand yet. The CIA is in this thing up to their eyeballs.
Yeah. The
only one that isn't CIA is Gordon Liddy. And Gordon Liddy would do anything. Well, kill Jack Anderson, no problem. Take care of that. That's Gordon. But everybody else was CIA. And Hunt and all these people were all on the payroll of the agency. But what we didn't know till I wrote 40 Years' War is that this war that Nixon had with Helms was real. They hated each other in a way you can't even begin to imagine. Remember I told you he signed NSDM2?
Yeah.
Terms of National Security. It has a line in there that says, Helms can't come to the meetings. We have a National Security Council meeting, but the head of the CIA isn't welcome. Now, something like that was attempted by Trump. Get rid of the CIA guy, but it didn't last long. The change didn't last long. Nor did Nixon's last long, because Laird said, how do we have a national security meeting without that CIA guy there? And really, Helms had a reason to really dislike Nixon. Nixon would take the information he got from the CIA and change it to fit his policies. And that just steamed Helms, because he thought, I'm sending him the real stuff, and he's changing it. And it had to do with ballistic missiles from the Soviet Union. And, he'd say they're the greatest danger in the world. It came in the way of my deal. So, yeah, there was real hatred. And to believe that all these CIA people were involved, including Schaffler, who's definitely intelligence. He's not just a police officer. He's an intelligence officer. And I spent a lot of time with Carl, and very friendly, but I got it. I understood it, what it was. He wasn't there by accident. Yes, it was his night off, and he was there, in my opinion, he was there, and we haven't figured it out yet. It's part of the Helms-Nixon war, because Helms knows about Dean's little operation, because he's using the same prostitute for the Columbia Plaza and the diplomats. They all come together. So, yeah. Helms knows about it, and he hates Nixon. What better way to get Nixon than, blow up the break-in? So, as you put this together, as I did, silent coup and then 40 Years' War, and now that I've retired, Ray Locker picking up for me as a protege, we know what happened. We know what happened. And we know the result of how it affects us today. It changed. You know, if Nixon had survived, Reagan never would have been president of the United States. He thought Reagan was some kind of a lightweight, and he just sort of pushed him to the side. If he had still had the power of the Republican Party that he had, Republican Party of Richard Nixon looks nothing like the Republican Party today. The Tea Party would have a heart attack over a Nixon Republican administration. So, yes, Helms had a real war going with Nixon, and I can't prove it, so I can't say to you Helms ordered what happened. But boy, if he didn't know what was happening right in Washington, D.C., how could I trust that he knew what was going on in Russia or Germany or anywhere else?
Yeah, very true.
I think he knew, and I agree that Carl Schöffler was an intelligence officer.
Now, what about this call girl ring? But were there any underage girls or?
Fentanyl. It could be hiding anywhere, including in your house, including in your medicine cabinet, or maybe at a friend's house when you're hanging out, playing games, and get offered a pill. Don't take chances. If a drug didn't come from a pharmacy directly to you, you can find fentanyl using a simple strip you can pick up at your local pharmacy. Don't take it until you test it, because fentanyl can be hiding anywhere. Brought to you by the Georgia Department of Behavioral Health and Mental Disabilities.
The underage boys involved with this prostitution ring?
No.
You sure about that?
No. I'm positive. I can see how it was done because there was only one phone in the DNC that had buttons that you could go around the system. That's the phone they used. And they were just servicing their elected officials. Honestly, there's no indicator that some 14-year-old was walking through the DNC and said to Maxie Wells, could I see the pictures? No, they had the pictures were hidden. And then when the DNC people came in, meaning the elected officials, hypothetically, like Bill Clinton, will come in and they could be serviced. That's all that was going on there. And Dean had been I don't know what it was, Madam X or something up in New York, big call girl ring. And he had this guy, Tony Lazowitz, who you might remember, was Dean's secret private investigator. And he goes up and he gets, all the names that is being serviced by this call girl ring. And it turns out 50% of them were Republicans. So Dean couldn't use it. And then he got the idea, if you do the DNC, they'll all be Democrats. And that's what he did.
Then what do you make of stories like Henry Vincent, Confession of a D.C. Madam, and, with the Craig Spence and all that stuff? That was all.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I've learned over the years that when you're asked a question and you really don't know, best to say you don't know.
Okay. And what about the D.C. Madam, that woman Palfrey, right?
Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah.
Know much about that. I've heard the stories, but I haven't, I don't know the facts.
I've had her lawyer on, and I've looked at some of the phone calls, and there were calls to places like the Archdiocese.
Well, look, we put up such a phony front, and that town it's got to be 80% hypocrites.
Yeah.
These people they say things and they can't possibly mean it. It just makes no sense. I don't know, but I found very few people who preached, particularly politicians, who preached about the right to life and preached about, going to heaven and God and all this. And it reminds me, there was a legislator in Maryland who always putting bills in against gay people. And he went on to the Congress, the House of Representatives, And they caught him having sex on 14th Street with a guy. And he was the biggest guy wanting to pass these bills to limit gays. Now, I think it works. I think when people become preachy, it's time to be a little suspect. Really. And particularly in Washington. You know, be best to separate politics from the kind of crap that they try to peddle. Makes a little sense to me.
I got you. Yeah, thou protest too much.
Well, you know what? Go up and do your job. You know, this country has been so dysfunctional for so long. Was I surprised that they had elected Donald Trump? Well, you know, the truth of the matter is the country wasn't working. And then they wanted us to think about our future. The Democrats said, oh, Clinton, that will be the future. And I said, you got to be kidding. You really have to be kidding. So she was the only one that could lose to him. If Biden had run, he'd have swept Pennsylvania. He'd have swept Wisconsin, Michigan, the very states that Donald Trump won, because these people didn't believe that the Clintons cared about them. It's dysfunctional, and they wanted to blow this country up, and they elected Donald Trump.
Okay, Len Colodny, we're taking a break. We got Len Colodny, author of the book, The 40 Years' War, and also the book Silent Coup, which could be behind the whole Trump tweeting Donald Trump. His website is Watergate.com.
Fentanyl. It could be hiding anywhere, including in your house, including in your medicine cabinet, or maybe at a friend's house when you're hanging out, playing games, and get offered a pill. Don't take chances. If a drug didn't come from a pharmacy directly to you, you can find fentanyl using a simple strip you can pick up at your local pharmacy. Don't take it until you test it, because fentanyl can be hiding anywhere. Brought to you by the Georgia Department of Behavioral Health and Mental Disabilities. Fentanyl. It could be hiding anywhere, including in your house, including in your medicine cabinet, or maybe at a friend's house when you're hanging out, playing games, and get offered a pill. Don't take chances. If a drug didn't come from a pharmacy directly to you, you can find fentanyl using a simple strip you can pick up at your local pharmacy. Don't take it until you test it, because fentanyl can be hiding anywhere. Brought to you by the Georgia Department of Behavioral Health and Mental Disabilities.